When my wife passed away, her wealthy employer called me and said, "I found something. Come to my office immediately." Then he lowered his voice and added, "Don't tell your son or your daughter-in-law. You could be in danger." When I arrived and saw who was standing at the entrance, I stopped in my tracks. If you're new here, stay with me, because this story is full of unexpected twists. Leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. Hit the like button, and subscribe if you haven't already. You'll want to see how this story unfolds. My name is Walter Bennett. I'm 62 years old, and I spent 34 years repairing heavy-duty trucks at a diesel repair shop outside Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I was married to the love of my life, Margaret Bennett, from the time I was 28 years old. This is her story every bit as much as it is mine, perhaps even more. Her funeral was held on a Thursday, November 6th, at Evergreen Memorial Funeral Home. That morning, a cold drizzle covered everything. It wasn't the kind of rain that poured. It simply floated through the air, soaking your clothes before you even noticed. I stood at the front of the chapel wearing the same black suit I'd last worn to my daughter's graduation. In front of me rested the casket of the only woman I had ever truly loved. I kept waiting for reality to sink in, but it never did. Margaret had passed away 10 days earlier. The emergency doctors called it a sudden heart attack. They said it happened without warning and that, at 59 years old, with her history of high blood pressure, it wasn't impossible. I accepted their explanation because I had no reason to question it. For 25 years, Margaret had worked as the executive assistant to Charles Whitmore, the owner of Whitmore Development Group, one of the largest commercial real estate companies in western Pennsylvania. She loved working there. She often told me that Charles Whitmore trusted her with confidential matters he wouldn't even discuss with members of his own family. Looking back now, I finally understand just how true those words were. Around 40 people attended the service. Neighbors, several of Margaret's former co-workers, and my younger brother Daniel, who drove in from Erie. My son, Ethan Bennett, sat in the front row beside his wife, Lauren, and I couldn't shake the strange feeling that something wasn't right. Neither of them cried. Not once. Lauren spent most of the service glancing down at her phone beneath the funeral program, while Ethan leaned over every few minutes to whisper something in her ear, quick and quiet, as though they were planning something instead of mourning his mother. At exactly 11:52 a.m., right in the middle of the pastor's closing prayer, my phone vibrated inside my jacket pocket. I almost ignored it. Then I looked at the screen. Charles Whitmore. I quietly stepped into the hallway, my pulse already beginning to race. The moment I answered, I heard something I'd never heard before in Charles's voice. Fear. "Walter," he said quietly, "I found something. I need you to come to my office immediately." To understand why that call unsettled me so deeply, you first have to understand who Charles Whitmore was. He wasn't the kind of man who lost his composure. I'd met him perhaps a dozen times over the years at company picnics, holiday dinners, and retirement celebrations that Margaret never actually attended because she loved her work too much to leave it behind. Every single time, he was calm, confident, and impeccably professional. The sort of businessman who owned several office towers downtown, yet still remembered the names of the maintenance staff and their children. Hearing that same man's voice tremble told me something was terribly wrong. "What did you find?" I asked, standing alone in the quiet hallway while the soft sound of the organ drifted through the chapel doors behind me. "Not over the phone," he replied. "Come to my office." Then his tone became even more serious. "And Walter, listen carefully. Don't tell your son. Don't tell your daughter-in-law. Not yet. You could be in danger." Before I go any further, I need to explain a little about my family, because otherwise none of what's about to happen will make any sense. Margaret and I built a comfortable life together on my mechanic's paycheck and her salary as an executive assistant. We never considered ourselves wealthy, but we paid off our house on Oak Ridge Drive, built a respectable retirement fund, and helped our son Ethan whenever he needed financial support. Unfortunately, over the last few years, those requests became more frequent. Ethan was 33 years old, and he'd been married to Lauren for almost 7 years. After losing his marketing job in 2020, the two of them started an online retail business that never really became successful. As their financial problems grew, they started visiting us more often. Sunday dinners became midweek dinners. Midweek dinners became random afternoon visits. Before long, Lauren volunteered to help Margaret organize her medications and paperwork, smiling as she said, "I'm just trying to make things easier for Mom now that she's getting older." At the time, neither of us thought anything of it. Margaret trusted her daughter-in-law, and I trusted Margaret's judgment. Looking back, that was our biggest mistake. During the weeks before Margaret passed away, I noticed changes in her that should have worried me much more than they did. She became tired all the time. She often complained that her head felt cloudy in the mornings. Sometimes she'd tell me it felt like her heart skipped a beat for no reason. Her doctor adjusted her blood pressure medication twice, hoping to solve the problem. Around that same time, Lauren started stopping by every Tuesday and Friday with the excuse of organizing Margaret's weekly pill container, so she wouldn't accidentally miss a dose. One Friday afternoon in September, I came home early from work and found Lauren standing alone in our kitchen, with Margaret's medication organizer spread open across the counter. Margaret was asleep on the couch in the middle of the afternoon, something she almost never did. Lauren smiled, told me Margaret was simply exhausted after taking a walk, and left about 10 minutes later. I never questioned it. 3 days before Margaret died, she asked whether I remembered signing paperwork together at the kitchen table earlier that summer. She thought it had something to do with updating our power of attorney. I told her I had no memory of signing anything. She frowned thoughtfully and said Ethan had mentioned bringing over some documents for us to review, so perhaps she was confusing them with something else. Neither of us thought much about it. We had no reason to. The morning Margaret died, a Sunday, I had driven to a gas station across town to fill up my truck. When she couldn't reach me, she called Ethan instead. By the time I arrived home 11 minutes later, the paramedics were already carrying her to the ambulance. She died before we reached the hospital. The doctors called it sudden cardiac arrest. Unexpected. No one questioned it. And in my grief, neither did I. Standing in that funeral home hallway with Charles Whitmore's frightened voice echoing in my ear, every one of those memories came flooding back. The medication organizer, the paperwork I never signed, the way Ethan and Lauren had slowly become involved in every part of Margaret's daily routine. "Charles," I whispered, "please tell me what's happening." "I can't explain this over the phone," he replied. "Margaret left me something 3 weeks ago, a sealed letter and a flash drive. She told me to open them only if anything ever happened to her." My stomach tightened. I opened them this morning. "What's on them?" "You need to see it yourself. Come straight here. Don't stop at home. And whatever you do, don't mention this phone call to Ethan or Lauren." By the time I ended the call, my hands were trembling. I returned to the chapel and sat through the rest of the service without hearing a single word the pastor said. After everyone began leaving for the cemetery, I quietly told Ethan there was some paperwork involving Margaret's insurance that needed my attention. "I'll meet everyone back at the house afterward," I said. He barely looked up from his phone. "Sure, Dad. Whatever." Lauren didn't even acknowledge me. She hurried across the rain-soaked parking lot, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement while speaking quietly into her phone. I stood there watching my daughter-in-law rush away from her mother-in-law's funeral as though she had somewhere far more important to be. A cold feeling settled deep inside my chest. I climbed into my gray 2017 Chevrolet Silverado, loosened my tie, and drove toward Whitmore Development Group's headquarters in downtown Pittsburgh, leaving my wife's freshly buried casket behind me. At that moment, I had no idea the worst part of the day was still waiting. Whitmore Development Group occupied the top 4 floors of a modern glass tower overlooking Liberty Avenue, one of the buildings Margaret always pointed to with pride whenever we drove through downtown. I parked in the visitor garage shortly after 12:40 p.m., still wearing my funeral suit, my thoughts racing with every possible explanation for Charles's urgent call. Inside the lobby, the security guard Martin recognized me from company events years earlier and waved me toward the elevators. Just as I reached them, a car screeched into the loading zone outside the front entrance, parking carelessly where no vehicle should have stopped. I turned toward the glass doors. It was Ethan's dark blue Honda Accord. I froze. My son was supposed to be at the cemetery, standing beside his mother's grave, comforting family and thanking friends for attending. Instead, he was here. There he was, standing outside his mother's employer's office building in downtown Pittsburgh, less than 30 minutes after telling me he'd meet me back at the house. I stepped quietly behind a large marble column near the elevator lobby, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Through the glass entrance, I watched Ethan Bennett climb out of his dark blue Honda Accord and hurry toward the front doors. As he walked, he straightened his jacket with nervous hands. His face wasn't filled with grief. It was filled with panic. He looked like a man desperately racing against time. I stayed perfectly still behind the column, watching my own son enter the building that Charles Whitmore had specifically warned me to keep him away from. For nearly a minute, I watched Ethan walk directly to the reception desk instead of the elevators. He leaned across the counter, speaking rapidly to the receptionist. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but I understood exactly what his body language meant. He was trying to convince someone to let him into a place he wasn't supposed to be. The receptionist politely shook her head. Ethan spoke again, more urgently this time. Finally, she picked up the phone, obviously calling someone upstairs for instructions. While they were distracted, I quietly slipped past them toward the elevators. Still wearing my funeral suit, I blended in well enough that Ethan never even noticed me. The elevator carried me to the 18th floor, my pulse echoing in my ears the entire way. Charles Whitmore was already waiting outside the elevator doors. His face looked drained of color, and his tie hung loosely around his neck as though he'd been pacing for hours. "Walter, thank goodness you're here." Before I could ask a single question, he looked toward the elevators and asked quietly, "Did you see your son downstairs?" "That was Ethan," I replied. "Charles? What's happening? Why is he here?" Charles' expression hardened. "Because this morning I accidentally called your home phone before I reached your cell." He paused. Lauren answered. "I only told her I needed to speak with you about some documents Margaret had left behind. I never mentioned what they were." He sighed heavily. "But apparently that was enough to send Ethan rushing over here before you arrived." A cold knot formed in my stomach. "Before I arrived? To get what?" Charles turned and led me toward his office. Without even looking back, he quietly said, "Your wife knew something was wrong, Walter. She wanted to make sure I told you the truth before they had the chance to stop it." His office looked exactly the way I remembered from company holiday parties years ago. Dark walnut furniture, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Pittsburgh, a massive executive desk. After quietly locking the office door, Charles walked to a bookshelf beside a framed photograph of the city skyline. Hidden behind several binders sat a plain brown envelope. Across the front, in Margaret's unmistakable handwriting, were the words, "For Walter Bennett only. Open only if something happens to me." Charles carefully handed it to me. "Margaret brought this to me 3 weeks ago," he explained. "She told me she didn't feel safe keeping it at home. She made me promise that if anything happened to her, I'd give it directly to you, and no one else." My hands trembled as I opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter. Taped to the back of it was a small USB flash drive. I unfolded the letter. Margaret wrote that she had begun noticing money disappearing from our joint retirement account. At first, the withdrawals were small enough to overlook. Later, they became much larger. The transfers had continued for nearly 4 months. She explained that after asking Ethan about paperwork she couldn't remember signing, his strange reaction made her suspicious. Instead of confronting him again, she quietly logged into our online banking account using the credentials she'd always managed for our household finances. What she discovered terrified her. She found a durable power of attorney filed with our bank earlier that summer. The document carried what appeared to be both of our signatures, but she knew she had never signed it. and she believed I hadn't either. Margaret also wrote that not long after Lauren began organizing her medications every week, she started waking up exhausted, confused, and unusually weak. She admitted she desperately wanted to believe it was only stress or illness, but deep inside, she feared something far worse. "I documented everything," she wrote. "If you're reading this, please don't ignore what I found." Charles waited quietly until I finished reading. "There's more," he said softly. "The flash drive." He connected the USB drive to his laptop and turned the screen toward me. The first folder contained dozens of screenshots Margaret had saved from our online banking records. Several transactions were highlighted in yellow. Between June and September, 4 separate electronic transfers had emptied a total of $64,800 from our retirement savings. Every transfer had been approved using the same power of attorney document Margaret insisted was fraudulent. The destination account belonged jointly to Ethan Bennett and Lauren Bennett. The second folder contained photographs Margaret had taken of her prescription bottles alongside pharmacy receipts, each one carefully labeled with notes in her own handwriting. She had compared the number of pills she was supposed to receive with the number that actually appeared in her weekly medication organizer. Something didn't add up. Again and again, she noted that unfamiliar small, oval-shaped tablets had somehow found their way into her pill case. They weren't listed on any of her prescriptions, yet they kept appearing alongside her regular medication. The third folder stopped me cold. It contained a screenshot of a conversation Margaret had discovered on the family tablet we kept in the kitchen for recipes and vacation photos. The messages were between Lauren Bennett and someone listed only as Mike. The conversation was dated less than a month before Margaret died. Lauren had written, "She's starting to notice the missing money. We need to finish this before she tells Walter." The reply came only moments later. "Increase it gradually. At her age, everyone believes heart problems happen naturally." I couldn't breathe. I simply stared at the screen while my mind struggled to accept what my eyes were seeing. Charles rested a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "Margaret came to me because she was afraid," he said quietly. "She believed that if anything happened to her, the people responsible would control the story before you ever learned the truth." He paused. "She made sure that wouldn't happen." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, he looked at me and said, "She protected you, even after she was gone. Now we have to protect you." I asked why he'd been so adamant that Ethan and Lauren never learn about the flash drive. His answer came without hesitation. "If Margaret's suspicions are correct, and everything we've seen strongly suggests they are, then this isn't just financial fraud anymore." He looked directly into my eyes. "If they're willing to steal your savings and manipulate legal documents, there's no telling what else they're capable of." He glanced toward the laptop. "They already have a forged power of attorney ready to take control of everything you own. We need evidence that will stand up in court," Charles continued. "Not just suspicion. And we need it before they realize we've uncovered the truth." That same afternoon, Charles contacted an old friend, Samuel Brooks, a retired homicide detective, who now worked as a private investigator. Samuel arrived less than an hour later. He was a broad-shouldered man in his mid-60s with silver hair and the quiet confidence of someone who had spent decades listening more than talking. He examined every file on the flash drive twice before finally looking up. "This is enough to justify opening a criminal investigation," he said, "but it isn't enough to guarantee convictions." He began making a list. "We need official pharmacy records. We need handwriting experts to examine that forged power of attorney. And Walter," he hesitated, "if you're willing, I'd like to install a few hidden cameras inside your house." I looked at him. People like this eventually become careless. They stop whispering. They start congratulating themselves. And when they think nobody is listening, they tell you everything. Only 9 days had passed since Margaret's funeral. Now 2 men were asking me to return to my own home and pretend nothing had happened, while my own son and daughter-in-law believed they had gotten away with the perfect crime. It was the hardest decision of my life. I agreed without a second thought. Margaret had trusted me with the truth. I wasn't going to let her down. 2 nights later, Samuel quietly installed 2 concealed cameras inside the house. One was hidden inside a smoke detector above the kitchen. The other was concealed inside an old mantel clock in the living room. During that time, Ethan and Lauren believed I was staying with my brother Daniel in Erie while I grieved. The following Monday, I returned home and told everyone I simply wanted to spend time surrounded by Margaret's belongings. The waiting began. 11 long days passed. 11 days of sharing meals with my own son. 11 days of pretending to believe every sympathetic word Lauren spoke. She casually brought up selling the house on Oak Ridge Drive more than once, gently suggesting that maintaining such a large home would become difficult for someone my age. Every evening I went to bed feeling physically sick. Every morning I forced myself to continue. Samuel kept reminding me that guilty people became most dangerous only after they believed they were completely safe. On the 12th day, they slipped. Ethan and Lauren stopped by for dinner. After the meal, I excused myself early, claiming I was exhausted. Once I reached the upstairs bedroom, the hidden kitchen camera captured every word. Lauren quietly said, "The retirement money's already transferred. Once he agrees to sell the house, we're finished." She smiled. "We won't even need that fake power of attorney anymore." Ethan answered without hesitation, "Just don't make the same mistake you made with Mom." The pharmacist almost figured out what was happening. Lauren laughed. Actually laughed. No pharmacist pays attention to an older woman's heart medication. Nobody ever checks. Within an hour, Samuel had secured the recording as evidence. Combined with official pharmacy records showing repeated unexplained early prescription refills, laboratory findings connecting those additional tablets to dangerous heart rhythm complications, and forensic handwriting experts confirming both signatures on the power of attorney had been forged, the case became overwhelming. Samuel finally closed the file. "We've got them." That evening, Charles looked across his desk and quietly said, "Now we bring everything into the open. But we do it on our terms." The opportunity came during the scheduled reading of Margaret's will. Our longtime estate attorney, Elizabeth Harper, had arranged the meeting for the following Thursday morning. Neither Ethan nor Lauren had any idea that Samuel Brooks would be waiting in the adjoining conference room. They certainly didn't know that 2 detectives from the Pittsburgh Police Department were parked outside, waiting for Samuel's signal. Throughout the week, I continued acting exactly as I had before. Quiet, grieving, trusting. Lauren even embraced me before the meeting began. She whispered how proud she was of my strength during such a difficult time. As she hugged me, I felt nothing. Only a calm determination. We gathered inside Elizabeth Harper's office shortly after 10 o'clock. Ethan wore a charcoal gray suit. Lauren was dressed entirely in black. Both appeared remarkably relaxed, convinced the morning would be little more than paperwork before collecting what they believed already belonged to them. Elizabeth began reading the will. A few minutes later, she paused and looked toward me exactly as planned. "Walter," she asked, "before we continue, is there anything you'd like to say?" I slowly stood. Yes. For the first time all morning, Ethan's expression changed. Only slightly. But I saw it. A flicker of worry. I looked directly at him. "I think it's time everyone here saw what your mother left behind." I nodded toward the office door. It opened immediately. Charles Whitmore entered carrying his laptop. Behind him walked Samuel Brooks. The moment Ethan saw Samuel, every trace of color disappeared from his face. Lauren looked back and forth between them. "What is this?" she demanded. "Walter, what's happening?" I held her gaze. "The truth." Charles quietly placed the laptop on the conference table. Without saying a word, he pressed play. Lauren's own voice filled the room. Clear, calm, confident. She spoke about the retirement account, about selling the house, about no longer needing the forged documents. Then Ethan's voice followed, warning her not to repeat the mistake she'd made with his mother. Silence settled over the room. Every sentence struck with devastating weight. Lauren's face drained of color, then flushed bright red. She shoved her chair backward and shot to her feet. That's not what it looks like." Lauren stammered, her voice trembling. "You're taking everything completely out of context." "Please sit down," Samuel Brooks said calmly as he removed his investigator's identification from his jacket pocket and placed it on the table. "There are 2 detectives waiting outside this office," he continued. "From this moment forward, anything either of you says may become part of a criminal investigation involving financial exploitation, document forgery, and the pending toxicology results connected to the exhumation request already approved regarding Margaret Bennett's death." For the first time since the meeting had begun, Ethan spoke. He never looked up. He simply stared at the conference table, his shoulders slowly collapsing under the weight of everything that had finally caught up with him. "Dad," his voice barely came out, "I never wanted Mom to die." Tears filled his eyes. "I swear, the medication was only supposed to make her confused, just enough so she wouldn't question the paperwork." For a moment the room seemed to disappear. I saw only Margaret lying in that hospital bed, and I remembered arriving just a few minutes too late to tell her goodbye. Charles quietly rested a hand on my shoulder, helping me stay steady. I looked at my son. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. "For more than 30 years, I said quietly, your mother made sure your plate was full before she ever served herself. She spent her life putting this family first. And while she was doing that, you were counting the days until everything she owned became yours." Silence filled the room. A few moments later, the office door opened. 2 Pittsburgh police detectives stepped inside. Lauren broke down crying before they even reached her. Ethan never resisted. He quietly stood, lowered his head, and walked out without saying another word. Nearly 8 months have passed since that morning inside Elizabeth Harper's office. Ethan eventually pleaded guilty to multiple counts of financial exploitation and forgery. He is currently serving a prison sentence. Lauren faced additional charges after toxicology reports confirmed that Margaret's body contained dangerously excessive levels of medication, far beyond the amount prescribed by her physician. She was convicted on the financial charges as well as criminally negligent homicide. The man identified in the text messages as Mike turned out to be Lauren's cousin, a pharmacy employee who had illegally diverted medication over several months. He, too, now faces criminal prosecution. As for me, I still live in the same house on Oak Ridge Drive. Some mornings the silence is overwhelming. Other mornings it feels peaceful. Not because the pain has disappeared, but because the truth no longer hides inside these walls. Eventually, the courts recovered every dollar stolen from our retirement savings, although, if I'm honest, the money was never what mattered most. What mattered was honoring Margaret. Charles Whitmore and I became close friends through everything that happened. One afternoon, he admitted something Margaret had never told me herself. He smiled and said, "She talked about you almost every day. She always said you were the most dependable man she'd ever known, and she never doubted that if the truth ever reached you, you'd do the right thing." Those words have stayed with me ever since. In Margaret's memory, I established a small charitable fund through a local cardiac care program to help families who struggle to afford ongoing heart treatment and medication monitoring. It's still modest, but every year it grows a little larger. Every contribution carries Margaret's name forward by helping someone else. I believe that's exactly what she would have wanted. Sometimes, I still think about that rainy afternoon outside the funeral home, about Charles's voice on the telephone, about the urgency in his words when he told me to come immediately. Margaret knew she might never get another chance to protect me, so she planned one final act of courage. Even after she was gone, the greatest gift she left behind wasn't the evidence. It was the chance to uncover the truth before it disappeared forever. And I'll spend the rest of my life making sure that gift was never wasted. If this story stayed with you, thank you for reading it. Take care of the people you love. Pay attention to the little things that don't seem quite right, and never underestimate the quiet courage of someone determined to protect the truth.